Daily Show. This is Christine Previtt on air on Wednesday for the Jerry PT version of PT on Ice. And I hope you guys have been following along with some of the stuff going on with the modern management of the older adult division. So we are about to start our new online cohort, September 16th. So if you haven't gotten any CEUs or you're looking at CEUs for the fall and you work with the geriatric population, I encourage you to jump online. We are also going to be in Minneapolis this weekend teaching the live version of Modern Management of the Older Adult. And we are going to be in Torrington, Wyoming next weekend. And then we are in Montana on the 5th of October. So we are going to be all over the US. Super, super exciting stuff. So if you're looking for where we are, go to ptonice.com and you'll be able to find some of our live courses. So today, I've been geeking out on the exercise literature in older adults as we've been working on this revamp for the online cohort. And it got me thinking a lot about the way that we're prescribing exercise for older adults. So I would argue that there are 5 main modalities of exercise that we use, especially in a geriatric population. We have aerobic exercise, resistance, power, balance, and flexibility. And oftentimes, if you guys have been following Dustin and I at all, our bias is definitely around making sure that we're applying the appropriate loading strategy for resistance training with the older adult. That's where my PhD is. It's where we see a need, especially with the rise of clinical geriatric syndromes like frailty and sarcopenia, where clinical muscular weakness is a main constituent or a main trait in terms of their presentation physically. However, when I was going through some of the literature on aerobic training and I was thinking about the roles of physical therapists and how we can best be serving our older adults, that's our mission statement in the modern management, is how can we best serve our older adult clients, I started thinking about aerobic exercise. And oftentimes when we're seeing people coming into our clinic, we're seeing them for orthopedic pain or functional impairment, and so resistance training is a big component to how we are trying to improve their functional status, increase their ability to live independently or reduce pain or allow for management of pain to hopefully avoid things like joint replacement. But we are also seeing people who are coming in with a large amount of multimorbidity. And so we're seeing people that are on multiple cardiovascular medications, have had things like MI or AFib or some sort of valvular issue, congestive heart failure. We're seeing individuals with diabetes and stroke. And in terms of the state of the literature, there isn't that much in terms of randomized control trials looking at healthy community dwelling older adults who are taking part in an aerobic exercise program. The literature starts to grow, and I'm not saying that it's not there, but the literature starts to grow when we start looking at pathology. And so there's a pretty large pool of literature, obviously, for cardiovascular diseases and the role of aerobic exercise in maintaining heart health. We also have a fairly substantial amount of literature on the use of aerobic training for diabetes and maintaining blood sugar regulation. And when I was starting to think about that and thinking about trying to take a step back and look at our clients very holistically, I was thinking that one of the things that I'm not doing a very good job on is making sure that I'm addressing all aspects of fitness. And ICE is a very fitness-forward organization. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, when I'm doing a home exercise program, am I doing everything that I can do in order to try to improve all aspects of health of my client? Even if they're coming to see me for a knee injury, am I prescribing 10 minutes on the bike to warm up the knee in a more gravity eliminated range of motion, but I'm also getting cardiovascular benefits? I'm not probably doing that as much as I should be. And so it's been something very front of mind, because if we are trying to help everybody with their functional status, their aerobic capacity is going to be a key component to that. And so one area of PT that I think does a really great job of making aerobic exercise come to the forefront of our minds is in our cardiac rehabilitation. And so there's a substantial amount of literature that looks at individuals who have either had some sort of symptomatic cardiovascular event, like a myocardial infarct, or had some sort of cardiovascular surgery, And they have a very laid out process in terms of working to build capacity in the cardiovascular system to make it stronger. And in that world, we're seeing that just like with resistance training, we need to load it. But in this case, we're loading the heart in terms of increased cardiovascular demand and using a very strength and conditioning type of principle of progressive overload in order for us to be loading the cardiovascular system and subsequently reducing risk for a subsequent cardiovascular event. And so when I'm talking to some of my older clients and I've been thinking about this, we often don't have a VO2 max test that's done to be able to get any sort of metric like percentage of VO2 max or heart rate reserve. And so what are we going to do if we are in private practice or in acute care or in a SNF setting and we don't have some of that data? And so oftentimes what we can do is we can use some of our physical performance measures to get kind of an idea around what we can do in terms of what a person is feeling in terms of energy with different aerobic tests. So as I was kind of thinking through this, I was thinking to myself, so what can we do if we do not have VO2 max or heart rate reserve? How can we measure intensity and apply principles of progressive overload? And so I've kind of come up with a couple of things, and you guys can let me know what you think. So the first one is that we're seeing a fairly good link between things like VO2 max and rate of perceived exertion. And so can we prescribe how hard we want exercise to be, or are we explicitly stating, okay, I want you to do 10 minutes of cardio. I want you to feel like it's a 6 out of 10 in terms of how hard you feel it is, where 10 is you are hyperventilating and hitting the floor because it's super hard, and 0 is you're just sitting very calmly without too much exertion. Are we saying we want you to be at this intensity? Are we applying things like a talk test? Saying, I want you to be walking with your spouse for 15 minutes every single night, a way for you guys to connect, but I want you guys to be going at an intensity that is saying that you have to take a breath every 4 or 5 words. And we know from the talk test how that's going to link to rates of perceived exertion, that we're in the hard to very hard range when we have to be taking a breath every couple of words because we're at an intensity. So in terms of us as PTs, if we don't have VO2 max or heart rate reserve, the use of RPE or talk tests are a way that we can objectively give an idea about exertion. And then the way that we can start to apply some objective data is by potentially using some of our walking tests that we often use anyway as part of our objective assessment. So I was thinking things like a 2-minute step test, which we actually do in the live version of the Modern Management, and it is no joke if you are going hard on a 2-minute step test. And you can use that type of stepping strategy and say, okay, we're gonna see where your baseline is. Say your step test was 40. We're gonna put you on an aerobic training program as part of your PT plan of care. It doesn't have to be what you're doing one-on-one, but say, I want you to start doing this because it's going to help with, clearing inflammatory markers, helping with range of motion because you're getting more circulation to those joints, all those things, talking about why this is also important, even if they're seeing us for a knee injury, for example. And then we can retest that in 4 to 6 weeks. And especially if someone has been doing no cardiovascular training at all, that is one way that we're seeing a measure of physical performance. We're going to see a lower extremity change, especially if we're doing something like a plan of care for knee arthritis, but we're also going to see if we can improve cardiovascular capacity. And it's a nice way to kind of, you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, where we're starting to allow individuals to get fit in their aerobic system as well as working on some of their things like pain management and resistance training for strengthening up a joint that is potentially painful. And so I was kind of trying to think about this. So we know if we don't have VO2 max, heart rate reserve, that we can use things like the talk test. Addison, you're amazing. Talk test is gold. It does start to describe intensity. We can start to use RPE. It's something that I'm not doing well, and I'm using you guys as my accountability to start, making sure that I'm pushing the aerobic system just as much as I am trying to get clinicians to be pushing some of the resistance training modalities. And then, so we have these objective measures, and then we can use some of the physical performance measures like a 2-minute step test, a 6-minute walk test that we're already performing to see change over time. When I'm doing my subjective assessment rather, when I'm working with a new client, oftentimes what I will talk about is what their exercise routine looks like. And many, many times people tell me that they are walking as their primary modality of exercise, which is great. Actually, on Instagram, Hannah Moves did an amazing infographic that talked about all of the benefits of walking at different lengths that's been described in the literature around circulation and stress management and reduction in risk for cardiovascular disease, for example. But oftentimes, going back to this question around intensity, are our clients, especially those clients that are older, are they walking at an intensity that is going to drive change in the cardiovascular system? And I would argue that they are probably not doing that, because there's a difference between physical activity and exercise. And physical activity can be, walking your dog and letting them smell every piece of grass or fire hydrant that they pass. And then they are oftentimes not working at the intensity that we need to drive change. And then there is exercise, which is purposeful movement, where we are really trying to change some sort of marker of fitness, whether that be lower extremity strength, balance, flexibility, or in this case, aerobic capacity. And so if we have individuals who are doing walking as their primary modality, and this is probably going to be a significant portion of your older adult population, we need to start changing the narrative around talking about walking. We need to start probing a little bit more. Do you know how long you're walking for? Because we know right now with the state of the literature, sometimes there's some people who are contesting that we can do more exercise snacks, and I've talked about this on previous episodes, but that we should be doing a bout of exercise that is 10 minutes, at least 10 minutes in duration. Ideally, you're doing about 30 minutes of aerobic exercise at least 5 days a week. And so are you doing a walk that is at least 10 minutes long? In that 10 minutes, are you breathing heavily? Do you feel like you're sweating? And some of my older clients, especially my older women, do not like sweating. They hate when they're coming to PT with me and they're sweating. They tell me that they don't like it. They don't like that feeling. So are you sweating? Are you pushing it? Are you able to carry on a conversation but are having to take a breath at the end of every sentence or after every couple of words? These are some of the probing questions that I think we need to start putting into our subjective. These are the probing questions that we want people to be thinking about as we are prescribing aerobic training, even if it's not in our one-on-one setting. Sometimes we can obviously use things like REMOMs in order to put a little bit of intensity and put a little bit of aerobic demand into our training sessions, but I'm more thinking about this for outside of the one-on-one PT session. And if that is the case, then we want to revisit those conversations again in a couple of weeks. So have you been doing your walking? How are you doing? How are you feeling that your breathing is? Are you still breathing heavy? Are you pushing it? Are you going a little bit faster? Are you going a little bit longer? And trying to encourage people to get involved in activities that they enjoy, but that are also going to put in the progressive overload needed to drive the cardiovascular system. So when it comes down to the basis or the clinical application of aerobic training, we can think about the two main modalities that we think about in terms of resistance training. So we think about progressive overload, where we have to continue to challenge a system to make it stronger. This is also true with the aerobic system. And the SAID principle, specific adaptation to implied demand, I believe is SAID. Basically, we need to be able to be doing things that, for example, if we're pushing walking, we're going to try and get people on a walking program if that is their goal. And so if we can get them on a walking program that's going to allow them to improve their endurance and improve their functional capacity in walking, especially community ambulation, if that is a big goal for some of our community dwelling older adults, then it's going to be something that we can do and we can objectively measure and progress in order for us to be seeing an improvement in that modality of a person's life. So usually I'm on the hat of resistance training, but today I tried to switch silos into the aerobic training And I want you guys to let me know, like, are you actually progressing aerobic training? Are you talking about aerobic training? Especially for your clients who are coming in potentially with a barrier to completing aerobic exercise, like arthritis in a lower extremity joint, who are on medications, multiple cardiovascular medications, are potentially borderline diabetic or have diabetes. All of these things that it's probably just as important for us to try and address the cardiovascular system as it is for us to try and address the orthopedic injury that they're coming to see us for, especially in terms of long-term goals. So let me know what you think. Put a comment below if you're, let's talk about the aerobic side of our exercise prescription. And I hope you guys found that helpful. So takeaway points: if we don't have VO2 max and heart rate reserve, we can start using our physical outcome measures like 2-minute step tests and 6-minute walk tests in order to get an objective measure of aerobic capacity. We can retest that in a couple of weeks to see not only are we seeing a physical or functional progression in terms of capacity, but we can also start looking at the aerobic system. We can start to measure intensity and start to educate on intensity in aerobic training for our home exercise programs for some of our older adults by talking about rates of perceived exertion and the talk test in order for us to be pushing our clients. And sometimes from a subjective perspective, we need to be actually asking the questions about intensity, not saying, oh, you walk, that's great, and continuing to go on down the checklist in our subjective exam. All right, have a great Wednesday, everybody. Hopefully I will see some of you in Minnesota or in Wyoming in the next couple of weeks. If you want to jump onto our online cohort, we are starting September 16th. You are gonna see all this new aerobic training literature.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.